Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something a bit different, maybe less about strict history or doctrine, and really entirely about practical survival. How to secure your own happiness in a world that often seems, well, dedicated to making you miserable. We're diving deep into some excerpts from a 1975 public address by Sun Myung Moon. It's titled Opportunity for Happiness or Unhappiness. And our goal here is pretty pragmatic. We want to crack open this philosophy, and it's packed with some intense stories and deep analogies, and really try to extract the universal mechanisms for navigating life struggles, figuring out how you determine your own personal fate almost moment by moment.
That's absolutely the crucial lens, I think, because although this material was, yes, initially for members of the Unification Church, it digs deep into the universal human condition and talks about emotional volatility, the unavoidable stuff like aging and loss, and that really sharp line between success and failure and finding joy. It sets up right away that happiness isn't, the default setting. It's something you have to continuously earn, like a prize.
Okay, let's unpack that journey then. The philosophy kicks off by challenging this core assumption that life, especially if you're committed to something like a path of faith, should be smooth. It says the road is inherently bumpy. What really struck me was the sort of brutal honesty about how human relationships shift as we get older.
Yeah, it pinpoints specific life stages. So in your teens, early 20s, maybe you're connected to your original family, lots of friends. But the source points out as you head towards your 30s, 50s, things really change. Siblings might separate, friends just kind of fade away actively, and your main emotional energy shifts almost entirely to your own immediate family unit, your spouse, your kids.
That's not just like a social observation, though.
Yeah.
It feels like a recognition of loss that's maybe necessary, or at least inevitable.
Exactly. And if we connect that personal volatility, that feeling of change, to the bigger picture, the text uses nature itself as this analogy for emotional instability. Think about, say, fishing on the ocean. One moment, the water is totally calm, peaceful. You feel that deep solitude. The next, a wind kicks up, and suddenly that same water is, well, angry, crashing violently onto the shore.
Right. That rapid shift shows we can't really rely on our surroundings or even maybe our own inner state to just stay calm all the time.
Precisely. Stability isn't guaranteed.
So if stability is, well, impossible, like that ocean example suggests, then what's the philosophy we need to actually thrive in all that constant change?
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The argument that appreciation only comes from the contrast. We only get joy because we've known sorrow.
Absolutely. The text gives this powerful example from the Arctic, where they have 24 hours of daylight sometimes. And the argument is, if that was your constant reality, you'd actually start to long for the darkness of night to come, just for a change. It's like food, right? You only really appreciate nourishing food if you can tell the difference between sour, bitter, sweet. The beauty of life, of nature, it comes from those sharp contrasts, the changing seasons.
Okay, so this volatility, this bumpiness, it isn't a mistake in the system. It's actually the design. And this thinking applies directly to any big life commitment, right? Joining a movement, starting a business, even raising a family. That initial feeling might be wonderful and thrilling, yeah, but the core ideology, putting it into practice day to day, that's hard. So the mission then is shifting your whole philosophy so you find happiness inside that difficult, constant change instead of waiting for some, mythical calm moment that just never shows up.
And that leads us right to the core premise. Happiness has to be attained. It's not a gift you get when you sign up. Real, lasting happiness. It's felt only after you make real what you've learned in your daily life, only after you win the victory over the tough stuff you encounter.
So failure is unhappiness in this view.
That's the definition, yeah. Failure is unhappiness.
Wow. Okay, so that puts the entire weight, the responsibility, squarely on the individual. The text is pretty uncompromising here. There's no ready-made place for happiness or unhappiness just waiting for you. Your actions, they're the only things that decide it.
You create your own emotional destiny.
Okay.
And if it's all based on action, then where are we? Where does this happen? The philosophy paints this really vivid, high-stakes picture. You are always, constantly situated on a boundary line, a point that's described as being as sharp as the blade of a sword or a knife.
Whoa.
Every single moment, you're right there. Step to the right, you move towards happiness. Step left, even just one tiny misstep, and you fall into unhappiness.
Oh, wait a second. Isn't that kind of a paralyzing amount of pressure?
Yeah.
To put that on every single decision, how does the philosophy suggest managing that constant alertness without just, burning out or getting totally overwhelmed by anxiety?
Well, that challenge is precisely why the mind's role gets emphasized so much. Moon's philosophy argues the mind is the subject. It's like the pilot that has to constantly decide the direction. And the text is surprisingly blunt about it. It basically says everyone already knows intellectually what happiness and unhappiness are. We know which way we should go, but people still habitually choose the path of unhappiness.
Hmm. So the anxiety maybe comes from ignoring that inner pilot?
That seems to be the implication. Yes.
And when you boil it right down to its simplest form, the text says unhappiness is when we separate from God, and happiness is when we have God in our heart.
Mm.
So it shifts from like a physical boundary line to a constant spiritual state of alignment. Is that right?
Exactly. And this alignment, this connection, it's happening every moment, all day, all night, 24 hours. It's not just when you're actively making some big choice. The source uses this really vivid, almost terrifying example. Even while you're asleep, you're deciding your fate. Because, if your house burned down while you slept, your life could end right there. Meaning that readiness, that alignment with God, it has to be perpetual. That decision point is always active, even when you're unconscious.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot.
It is. And to get that kind of perpetually active happiness, well, you have to pay a price, a significant one. The text brings in this concept of indemnity. It actually calls indemnity a blessed word for when times are difficult.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. For someone listening who isn't familiar with that specific word, indemnity, what's the practical meaning here? What's the universal currency being paid? Is it basically accepting sacrifice or suffering or maybe paying necessary dues as a kind of prepayment for future grace?
That's a perfect way to put it, a pragmatic translation. Indemnity represents that necessary sacrifice, or maybe a debt that has to be paid off.
Yeah.
And it's called blessed precisely because once that debt is paid, it promises grace and blessedness. It's about reframing difficulty as a crucial, almost transactional step.
Okay.
What's really fascinating, though, is the implication that to fully pay this debt, you might actually need to seek out your enemy, not just your friends. Because often the deepest growth, the biggest payment, comes from facing those who challenge you the most severely.
That completely flips the script on how we usually approach struggle, doesn't it? Instead of avoiding friction, you should maybe actively embrace it. And the source gives these truly powerful, almost heartbreaking stories about people who abandoned their core commitment, maybe left the movement, and were just overcome by regret, even after they achieve what looks like external worldly success.
Yeah, the text describes young women, for instance, who had married successful men, they had gifted, healthy children, secured a very comfortable life on the outside. But internally, they were tormented. They felt that their children, despite all the success, were not products of blessedness. Or even worse, they felt they were born of satanic lineage.
Wow, that's heavy.
They internalized their past decision, that moment of leaving, as a failure so profound that it just tainted everything in their present reality. They started attributing all subsequent difficulties, maybe a child getting seriously sick, big marital fights, even something bizarre like a fierce dog barking at them in some strange village. They saw all of it as direct punishment. They'd think, this is indemnity I have to go through.
Goodness.
And the regret described is so visceral. They apparently state they miss the leader even more now than when they were actually involved. Some wish they could just return to the movement and, quote, play the role of a dog there just to be near him again.
That's jarring.
Mm.
To hear that worldly success gave zero comfort against that deep internal sense of having failed some ultimate test.
Zero comfort. And the core lesson the text pulls from their misery is crucial. Their failure wasn't seen as something that built up over years. No, it was caused by one single pivotal moment, one event.
Right. They argue, if only that thing hadn't happened, or if only that person hadn't been an obstacle, I wouldn't have fallen away.
Exactly. The text really emphasizes that one single wrong word, one wrong look, hearing something the wrong way just once. That can cause untold misery and unhappiness forever. The stakes of that micro moment, they just couldn't be higher.
Okay, so if one single moment can lead to potentially eternal misery, then the virtue you need to navigate that constant boundary line, that knife's edge, and avoid that fate, it must be patience.
That's it. The text calls patience the most important virtue to embody, and also the utmost knack for winning people over.
Winning people over. Okay, let's talk about that. What's the immediate consequence of choosing the opposite, choosing anger or reaction?
Total mutual defeat. That's how it's put. If someone shouts at you and you shout right back, the philosophy says both of you are defeated and shattered instantly. Plus, anger is described as physiologically poisonous. The moment you show frustration, frown at someone. Your internal happiness, your personal victory, it's gone. compromised.
It's like an act of self-sabotage then.
Completely.
But this patience, it's not just passive like biting your tongue, right? The text suggests it requires an inner fight first.
Absolutely. You have to fight against your own self first on a spiritual level. The training involves cultivating the sense of nonchalance, basically neglecting the angry person when they lash out instead of instinctively reacting. If you can win that first internal struggle, the fight against your own urge to retaliate, you've essentially already won the external battle.
And this internal struggle, this is where that idea of reframing the difficulty comes back in, right?
Okay.
Instead of focusing on how hard something is, the bitter medicine, you have to accept it willingly, almost with open arms.
Yes. Let's take the example used in the speech. Getting up at 4:30 a.m. for an early morning devotional or pledge ceremony.
Okay. So instead of thinking, what a bother, I'm so tired,
Yeah.
you have to actively choose to see the good side. Like look at the stars that are still out when you get up. You can feel wrapped in the, mystery of nature.
Or you can hear the rooster crowing, providing this rhythm, or just appreciate that you can drive freely in the early morning, no traffic jams.
Right. So your subjective way of thinking, the way you choose to see it, that determines whether the exact same action feels miserable or happy.
It shifts the whole power dynamic, doesn't it? You're taking back control of your subjective experience from whatever the external circumstance is. And the philosophy connects this level of patience back to the highest spiritual example imaginable. God himself, the source notes, had to forgive and stay patient when his own son was crucified. If God had reacted with anger at that moment, destroyed creation, well, he would have been a failure, according to this view.
So patience isn't just about waiting it out. It's actually about having the capacity to rebuild, to start over.
Precisely. Patience is called the motivation of recreation and restart. It's what allows a relationship or a path to begin again, even after something catastrophic happens.
And this virtue, patience, it's coupled with another key philosophy, living for the sake of other people. Which sounds like it requires extreme humility, placing yourself in a lower position, maybe.
Yes, very much so. If your siblings or just others around you are actively against you, the source argues that if you can remain well-poised, cool, and collected, you actually end up occupying their hearts. Eventually, they'll surrender before you, emotionally speaking.
That's quite a strategic approach to conflict, isn't it?
It is. It's like by forgiving and embracing your enemy, by actively stepping over to their side, trying to understand or absorb their difficulty, you effectively occupy him. You win them over internally. This twin principle, patience on one hand and living for others on the other, it's presented as the secret to achieving peace, love, and ultimately happiness, even in this volatile world.
Okay. So let's pull back and look at the whole picture for you listening. What does this all really mean? The core takeaway seems to be that the entire path of your life, whether you end up in that deep regret or you attain lasting happiness, it's decided in the micro moments right now. Your philosophical framework, your decision in that instant to be patient on that blade of a sword, that's everything. You have to always think of that one moment.
Yeah, the philosophy is absolutely uncompromising about needing to be alert. It warns flat out you cannot relax. If you relax, you are apt to fall into the dungeon of hell. That success promised to followers, it's totally conditional on this relentless dedication, this constant internal vigilance. And maybe here's that final provocative thought drawn right from the source material. The leader's own life philosophy was apparently defined by this idea. He must win. At all costs, especially because his enemies were actively praying for his failure. If he failed, he said, they would be allowed to laugh at me.
Wow.
And this intense determination, it wasn't just about personal ego, you see. It represented the absolute necessity of never surrendering the spiritual fight. That kind of ultimate success, that victory, was promised to his followers too, but only if they maintained their own successful journey towards the goal. A journey achieved, moment by moment, through patience and service.
That's a really powerful mandate for anyone, isn't it? Recognize the constant change, the bumpiness of the road, understand the immense psychological weight of just a single moment, and then consciously choose patience in serving others over just reacting or looking out for yourself. That's definitely a deep dive into self-determination.